All right, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at installing the drive shaft safety loop, and the heater box. And if we have time, we'll go and start working on the radiator. So let's dig in and get started. Okay, let's take a look at the drive shaft. All right, we've got the spacer, the drive shaft, and we have 10 M10 by 25 and 4 M10 by 20s. And what you do before you start is you take this spacer, you see how it's machined out here, that coincides with this here. You put it in place and you screw the nut in, or the bolt in, and that bolt should just barely get to the end of this spacer. If it sticks out, then the spacer to the drive shaft will use the 20 millimeter length. In my case, the spacer and the rear end will all use the 25 millimeter length. Before I get underneath and start putting all this together, remember all these need to have a nice stripe of red Loctite on them. Because it's a little hard to film underneath the car, what I'm going to do is I'll take a bunch of still photos and I'll talk you through it. So here we go. Let's get this put together. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and put this adapter on, and we're going to torque it down to 70 foot-pounds. There it is, complete and ready to go. Next, we slide the drive shaft into the back of the transmission. I found the easiest way to get it to line up with the rear end was to bring it down from the top and then lower it down in place like you see here. And once you get everything lined up, go ahead and torque it down to 75 foot-pounds. I found it was a lot easier to get at it through the top. So that's what you're seeing here. Okay, let's talk about drive strat hoops. Okay, I have the Allstate version. It's just a generic Allstate hoop that you can get on Amazon. I'll put a link down in the comments for you. There's a couple different versions. Some of them are a little more eloquent than this one. This one, though, the way I'm going to put it together is if you just imagine the two round tubes, the main portions of the frame, I'm just going to bolt these to the bottom of it. And then this will have plenty of clearance on the bottom. But if you look at the way this sits here, it actually goes down inside here like this. But that's a little bit too low. So what I'm going to do to give myself adequate clearance and still clear the tunnel is I'm going to weld these onto here so that I can raise this up a little. So these are actually pieces of material from the brackets that held the motor inside the crate when the motor came out. So I'm repurposing these, and we're going to weld these tabs right here like this, which will allow me to raise up this upper loop to give me a maximum amount of clearance. Let's see how that looks when I'm done. All right, the one on the left here shows you how much I added. I'll go ahead and drill the appropriate holes in there, paint it black, and make it look pretty. Okay, so the way this is going to set up under the car is, if you imagine this is the bottom of the round tube, I want it to line up with the center of these bolt holes right here. So that's going to go like that. Just imagine this being the tube of the chassis. And then we'll use two bolts that'll go up into the chassis frame. You'll notice here, I put a set of washers between this and the loop, and that was to get it more centered over the center of the drive shaft. So that'll slide that over that way, and everything will match up perfect. So here it is with the right side of it bolted to the bottom of the chassis. Okay, here you can see it going over the top of the drive shaft. It looks a little off center, but that's just the camera angle. Here's a look from the bottom with the bottom piece in place, and you can see we've got it centered up right over the drive shaft. Now just tighten everything up and you're all done. Okay, one of the hardest parts about showing you how the axle and everything goes together, it's impossible to get a camera down in there and get you a good picture of it without a full lift, which I don't have. So let's look at this illustration here and see if I can get you sorted as to what's going on. So right now, my drive shaft looks something like this. Okay, I've got about a 6-degree angle. What you're looking for, ideally, is, first of all, the face. You want these faces here, the yokes, to be parallel to each other. So you want it to be like this. Now, if it's exactly lined up, it's not actually good for it because it makes it hard on the U-joints. So what the ideal setup is to have these offset so that your drive shaft angle is between about a half a degree to 3 degrees is ideal, okay? See, this is what I have right here. I've got in excess of 3 degrees. So what's going to happen is I'll get extra noise and these will wear a little more quickly. What you don't want to do is keep jacking that transmission up until you have the yoke parallel here and it goes straight back here. This is going to make all kinds of noise and vibration, and it's not what you're looking for. So our goal is to turn this setup and get it as close to this setup as we can. Let's see how that works. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to jack up the transmission from the front. We're going to jack it up until the face of the transmission is perpendicular, and then the two faces of the transmission and the rear end are parallel to each other. That's our goal, and we want to minimize the angle of the drive shaft. So what I did was I made these big spacers that'll cover the whole drive shaft, support. So it's a bit of overkill. They probably could have been about that long and worked just fine, but it's what I have, and they're going to work just fine. I've read that most people are shimming their transmissions between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch. So we'll start at 1/2 and see what that looks like, and we'll go from there. Now, before we do that, what we're going to have to do, we want to go ahead and loosen the motor mounts down here. That way that engine can move freely and we're not putting everything in a bind. Okay, so I put these spacers in place and I ended up using 5/8 of an inch worth, and that got all of my measurements within about a degree. So if I figure I'm plus or minus a degree, everything should be lined up pretty well. So I'm really, really happy with that. I'll try to get you a picture of it.
There you can see the spacers in place with the brand new longer bolts to hold it all together.
Okay, first step in starting the heater box is you got to go ahead and cut this template out that comes with the instructions. And first, before you do that, lay the template up against your box. This piece right here. Make sure that these line up with these. They said there are some boxes that are off a little. Mine is dead on, so I'm pretty happy about that. It says to move it 6 5/16 inches from here to here. We actually are a little bit further over to the left because I don't want it to interfere with my fuel regulator, and it gives me a little more room behind my dashboard for hoses and things like that. So we laid the template on here, we drew out where we're going to cut our hole, and we drilled spot holes in here in accordance with the templates for where the bolts are going to go. And then we also have the 2 pilot holes for the 1 1/4 inch holes we're going to put here for the exit of the 2 pipes. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut this out, and then we're going to lay the box in place. I hope you can see this. So the first thing you do is you take that template and you lay it over and make sure that these line up with the holes and everything fits and that the template is correct, because even in the directions it says the template can be off a little for these holes. Well, now that I'm looking at it, both of these pipes kind of bend off this way a little. So yes, my template was correct for the ends, but not for where it goes through the firewall. So I'm going to have to open this up now so that these aren't rubbing, and to be able to accept the grommet. All right, now that we've got the box generally placed where it's going to go behind the dashboard, I'm going to go ahead and install a 10-inch grab bar on the dashboard, which will hopefully keep people from grabbing my windshield. Fingers crossed. So I'm going to put that thing right about here, okay? And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take, I have some 6061 T6 aluminum, a 16th inch piece, which is pretty stout, and I'm just going to mount it behind the dashboard all the way up to here, and that'll not only that will become my dashboard support, that'll be a backup for this. So let me show you how we did that. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is a little piece of cardboard we're going to mock it up with, but we're going to bend this at the angle to match the angle of the dash, and we're going to hook it to the main support across the front here. So this will just lay in here like this. Okay, we'll get the location nailed down, and then I'm going to secure it on the top side with steel rivets, and then the bolts on the handle with some nice fender washers will suck it up against the dashboard here. So now I'm going to take this template over and I'm going to cut my metal and get it bent and in place, and I'll show you what that looks like when it's completed. Okay, so here's what I came up with. Like I said, this is 16th inch 6061 T6 aluminum, and this just slips right down in here like this, and it's going to rivet to the big square support going across the middle of the chassis, and then it'll butt right up against the dashboard there. So it's going to double as a dash support and my grab bar. And believe it or not, I got to brag about this. I bent this one time, got it on the first try. Super impressed with myself. I guess I get to take the rest of the day off. Okay, so I set this up so that the handle is about halfway between the opening and the bay here. Kind of disregarded the foot panel, or the foot box, as that dives off to the outside there. So we measured it up, put some tape down. We're going to set it right here. I've got my initial pilot holes drilled. Now we're going to drill it and move on to getting the support drilled and mounted as well. Okay, there's a test fit, looking good. Okay, we get this installed, centered on the two holes that I just drilled. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark the location of the handle. Okay, so we've got it mocked up. Now we've measured, and we're going to cut this bolt right here on both sides. I'm going to cut these two bolts down to an appropriate size. Okay, so I've got the bolts shortened here. I've got this tightened up, real tight up against here. And now I'm going to go ahead and drill and clecal these holes. And then we'll put in 3/16 steel rivets to hold it in place. No silicone on this one. Okay, I just wanted to show you this. This is just a fender washer, but these are the extra thick fender washers. So when you go to tighten it up, it helps spread the load more. And that's what I'm using on this installation. Okay, I hope you can see it here. Rivets installed, bolts tightened up with a little bit of blue Loctite, and this thing is solid. Very happy with that. All right, now we're going to flex back to the heater. And we're going to talk about mistakes. You can see this is the template for the heater right here, and it looks like it fits real nice, doesn't it? Now it says right here it should be 6 5/16 inches from this edge, right from the edge of the metal here. And I actually moved it this way towards me, about 3/4 of an inch, just because it gave me more room with everything else I had going on in here. And by looking at this template, looks like it's a good idea, works fine, right? Well, let me show you something. What the template does not account for is the box isn't level. It actually slopes upward like this. So if I lay this straight edge here, you can see it's going to interfere with the body if it's mounted level like that. So had I followed the instructions, it would have been moved over in the right location, and I wouldn't have had this problem. Now, the way I'm going to solve this problem is, fortunately, these rubber grommets have a little bit of forgiveness to them, so we can actually tilt the box like this without having to re-drill the grommet holes, and it gives me my clearance above the top of the box. And what's going to have to happen is I'm going to have to open this hole up to match this, and then just use a patch with some silicone to cover all that up. Now I can actually tilt it enough that just by siliconing around the edge, it's not going to be visible once the motor's on there. So I can make up for the mistake, but just keep that in mind. This template is not the whole answer, because that box is tilted like this. So this is what I'm going to have to do. So that means I'm going to have to set the template up on the back. What I'll do is I'll hook the template to the box, set the box up here, trace it so I know where it's going to sit on this metal, and then I can re-drill the holes to mount it again. And then once the holes are mounted, I'll open this back up so that I get full airflow through it. So mistake on my part, but not the end of the world. We can fix it, and unless they take it all apart, they're not going to know it's there. Of course, it will haunt my dreams. My next step is to put an ample amount of black RTV silicone around the opening, and then this gets put in place, and you're supposed to bring the other side in and bolt the two together. Well, I kind of looked at the logistics of being able to move all of this around and get it lined up with a big chunk of silicone on here that I don't want spread all over the place. So what I'm going to do is, seeing as I don't have an extra set of hands today, I'm going to silicone this side up, and I'm going to put it in place and put the screws in to hold it, let that silicone dry. Then I can silicone the motor piece and put that on, and I'm not chasing both of them around as they slide all over the metal. So let's go ahead and get that executed. Okay, while that's drying, let's talk about a couple other things. And I apologize for the sound of the air conditioner running in the background, but it's just too damn hot to turn it off, so hopefully you can hear me. All right, so a couple lessons learned. One, I started looking at where I was going to mount the ducting, okay? And the stuff that goes to the vents hooks to the bottom duct down here. It would have been way easier if I had hooked that up before I bolted the box in place. So that's a lesson learned right there. Also, like a lot of guys, I'm going to go with a single defroster vent because it's just too congested over here to make it work the way I want it to. So, single defroster vent in the middle. I don't plan on driving this in the rain, and worst case, I'll just look over the damn windshield. All right, so that means I need to block this off. And all this is a 1 3/4 PVC cap. I had to come in with the Dremel tool and kind of clean it up a little bit, but then that'll slip right over there, and I'll glue that in place, and then that'll seal that off. Okay, so for placing these, what they tell you to do is to use screws, or I'm going to use rivets, and put this on the surface you want to attach it to. Now, what I'm going to do for this one is, hopefully, I am going to hook it right here, and I'm going to attach it to the main crossbar. So that'll sit right there just like that, and it's out of the way of everything else, and the passenger has easy access to it. Okay, different view on this one. What I'm going to do here is, I was going to set it up right here, kind of the same way I did on the other side, but what I'm really going to end up doing, because I don't want to cover up my number plate there, I'm going to hook it right here on this steering wheel support, so it'll hang down here this way, and it just less interference with the wires, and it doesn't cover up my VIN number here on the frame. Okay, so here's a look with the motor installed. I was able to just pull the screws out. The back box stayed glued to the firewall, and then put this thing on, so it made it easy to do it by myself. So that worked out well. Got my hoses hooked up. I got the lower hose coming out, going down, and swooping up to the water pump, and then the line coming off of the manifold right here. And of course, I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to put my control valve in here wherever it's going to fit based on the length of the cable. So the next thing I have to do is fit the cable and the wiring harness. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this switch so that it's behind the firewall. So or behind the dashboard. I'll actually reach up under the dashboard to activate it. And that way I don't see it, because I think it's ugly and I don't want it on my dashboard. So how am I going to do that? First of all, the good news is the hole that I inadvertently drilled in the beginning is going to work perfect to run these wires through. I put a piece of paper behind it so you can see it there. We're going to put a dashboard support in, and I'm going to drill a hole in it to support this. That's how that's going to work. Okay, so how are we going to do that? So the way I want to do that is I made a little support, okay? I used that 16th inch 6061, so it's going to be really stout, much more stout than the thin stuff they provide. And you can see I bent it just a little bit so that it can sit on the dashboard and on the big 3-inch crossbar that I use to hook up the hand grip, okay? And then I drilled the hole in it here, but there's a problem with this hole. You see how this hole is round? The switch itself, you've got to be able to spin it, right? So it's got one side that's flat, okay? And we have to come up with a plan to make it so that this doesn't just spin around. Okay, here's how I'm going to crack this code. I'm going to take a piece of metal, and I'm going to drill a hole in it that matches this hole. Okay, so there's my matching hole. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a portion off of this to match up the flat spot on the switch itself. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this here like this. I'm going to flip this over like this. And I'm going to rivet this to this piece of metal. And now I've got my flat spot, so my knob won't twist around. And there's what it looks like when it's done. I'll paint it up and make it look pretty.
And here's a poor quality photo of what it looks like installed under the dashboard.
Okay, now that we've got the switch in place, we've got ourselves grounded right here on the frame rail. We scraped away the powder coat before we bolted it there. There is only one wire you need to hook up, and that's the blue wire to the brown wire in your harness, okay? And I'm going to put a plug on that. I'll shorten this wire up. We'll hook these two together and see how it works. Okay, the last thing I'm going to install is the valve to turn it off and on. You see, you got the arrow pointing back at the box. That's what we want. And I'm going to go ahead and install it right here. So what I did was I opened this all the way up with the lever. I closed this with the lever, looked and made sure it was closed, made sure it was all the way forward, and then I went and tightened the cable down right here to hold it in place, okay? Now, I'm going to set this thing kind of where it wants to sit, which looks like I'm going to cut it right here to put this side in, and then I'll adjust the length of this side here once I get everything set in place. Now, I'd like to have it face this way, but if it's going to interfere with the cover, I'm probably going to turn it like this to get it out of the way. Let's see what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, there's the installation. Let's check operation. All right, works like a champ. Now let's check out our super secret blower switch. Works like a champ.
Next thing we're going to do is put the radiator into the chassis. Before we do that, we need to remove these tabs that I just pointed to. And these tabs need to go because we're going to use a piano hinge method similar to what Breeze sells. Okay, we're going to gently cut off these tabs and ensure we don't damage the main crossbar. And then we'll sand and clean it all up to make it look pretty. A touch of paint to prevent corrosion, and then we're off to work on the radiator. Okay, I went with the Breeze fan shroud. It's really simple. It's just 4 bolts to bolt the fan to the shroud. So that's step 1.
Okay, I've got my piano hinge cut to length, and then I'm just going to set it up on here and center it on the top flange. And go ahead and mark where I'm going to drill my holes. Now I'm going to use 3/16 steel rivets on these. And I'm going to put the hinge itself behind the lip so that when I clamp the rivets down, they're grabbing into steel versus aluminum. So that'll make that a little more stout. I'm also going to put a couple of long bolts that go through here and go through the hinge and just give overall support in here. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that once we get to that point. Next line of silicone, and we're going to cleco it back in place and get our rivets in. Next I'm going to run 2 bolts to give it a little extra support. These will go through both sides of the radiator, and this is just a roll pin that I got at Home Depot. It's made of steel, works great. It's 1 washer away from being the perfect size. So we'll put it in here with its commensurate 1 washer. And we'll bolt all that up. So the shroud drops on just like this. Remember, the flat part goes to the top, cord goes to the bottom. I actually had that backwards, so when you weren't looking, I had to flip it around real quick. But what I've done is I've lined it up where I want it, and I've re-drilled the holes so that these pins can go through and they'll be securing the radiator or the shroud here and here. And just for a little bit extra, I'm going to put 1 here. And then we'll drill and install 2 more, or we'll do 3 down on the bottom to hold it all together. So let me go get that done, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. Okay, here's the front buttoned up. You can see I tied these in to the shroud, and then I put an extra one here. And on the back here, I just went with 2 as per the instructions. That's all I really needed. What I did do, though, is I offset the whole thing this way to give myself a little more room right here to work the hose around the inlet. Okay, here's a look of the radiator mocked up in position. I'm going to go ahead, once I pull these clecos out, these are going to be riv nuts in here. So if I ever have to take it off, I don't have to drill any rivets out. I can just unscrew it. Okay. I have it set up at an angle of 58 degrees, which is to support the replicacars.com single piece aluminum, which kind of comes like this. Okay. So that I'm not going to mess with till I get the body on. So you see I had to move the horns. I had to bend the horns out just a little bit to get some clearance. Nothing significant there. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own bottom support similar to what Breeze came up with. So let me get started on that, and I'll show you what it looks like. Let's talk about the radiator support. There's a bunch of these available. Breeze makes a really nice one. But I just wanted to do one of my own. So I had some extra materials laying around, so here's what I did. I took a piece of 1/2-inch tubing, and then I took a 1/2-inch nut, cut the head off, and I just welded it in place at the end. Of course, I measured this to fit in the space underneath the radiator, right? Okay. So then I got this threaded rod in here. Then on the other end, what I did was I just took a little piece of metal, and I made a little slot in here so I have some adjustment, and then I bolted the rod to this brace. And then I'll show you how we're going to hook it under the radiator. This might be a little bit hard to see, but what we're going to do is we take the finished piece here, and you notice I put a little piece of rubber tubing over it to give it some padding, okay? But we're going to slip this under the lip of the radiator, and we're going to rotate it in place. And what we want to do is this radiator is set where I want it at 58 degrees. And I'm going to set these where they're going to lay and then I'm going to mark so I can put an attachment point right there. Okay, so now I will put a couple of riv nuts in here, and then this will attach like this. And if I have to move it, I've got a little bit of adjustment where I can move it back and forth and up and down if I have to change the angle of the radiator. Okay, and there's the final installation. You can see I've got the Allen head screws going into riv nuts across the top here. And then on the bottom, you can see our extra fancy schmancy lower support. And you can see I still have got some adjustment there where I can move it around. And that's all there is to it. All right, what you have here is the Breeze lower tube. I like that a little better than the corrugation. And then now we're going to get underneath and go ahead and trim it, as it says right here, okay to trim for best fit. This hooks to the motor, this goes underneath the X, and this hooks back into the radiator. All right, one more item I wanted to show you is this little item from Breeze. This is a support for the lower radiator line, and it goes together very simply. Once you get your line mounted and you get it close up to the cross member that it's going to go under, you go ahead and put this over the tube. Put this over the tube. That goes like that. And then this has got a little curve in it to go up against the X pipe. And it just bolts in place like that. And I'll show you what that looks like when it's installed. It's not really easy to see, but there's the lower pipe installed. It's actually a very clean installation. I will show you a picture of it from the bottom. The thing we're going to put together is the overflow tank for the radiator. You got these two little nipples here that you have to put on the bottom. I apologize that I already put this together, but one of them is just a nipple that hooks on the bottom, and the other one is the long tube, a metal tube that goes all the way up inside there. Doesn't matter which hole you put them in, but I went and put a little dot on this one so I could remember which one was the tube, because this is the one you're going to hook the hose that comes off the radiator cap to. Okay, very important. And then this is just going to be the drain valve that goes out the bottom of the car. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the cap, after we do that, of course, we're going to put the cap together, and it's just like we did before. You just stuff the rubber thing in there and get that all sorted. And away you go. Okay, then now what's going to happen is this plate is going to mount on the chassis, and then this will bolt to here to hold the can. And then this last piece, the bottom part, will hook down on one of the chassis frame pieces. So let's go over and take a look at the chassis, and we'll see if we can't pull all that information together. Okay, the directions don't specify a specific distance from the front of the car, but it does go just past where the brake line comes out. So I'm just going to line this up here where it gives me clearance on that brake line, and I can intercept that line, that bar down below. So I think right about there is going to do it. All right, so I'm going to clamp this in place where I think it needs to go, right about there. Okay, now we're going to do a double check. So what I'm looking for is that this bottom one can bolt here and still have it straight up and down, which apparently it can, because it's falling right to the floor. Yep, that's what I'm looking for right there. All right, cool. So I zeroed this level to the frame of the car because we want this to be generally perpendicular to the chassis. We want it to be straight up and down, right? So when you get it straight up and down, these rivet holes that you're going to use here are not going to be lined up with the bar because the bar slants down like this. So you just got to try to find a happy average there where you can get enough meat to get some supports in there. Now, they want us to use screws, sheet metal screws on this bracket. It's bolted here, so here I'm going to go ahead and rivet this in place because I just think it's going to hold a little better. And we're using the 3/16 steel rivets on this because all the components we're putting together are steel. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the bottle in there the way I want it to sit. And then I will come back around with the and hook the bottom part in.
Okay, I want to talk about these hoses real quick, hooking up to the T connector where the radiator cap is. I really didn't like the corrugation and all the other nonsense they have, so I am fortunate enough to live in a place where the O'Reillys will let me go back and look at all the different hoses hanging on the wall, and all I did was just pick out a couple that would follow the course I needed to get from the top of my motor to my radiator. I bought them, I cut them, I put them in place. I also opted for a metal radiator cap versus the plastic one.
So here we are. We got it all set up and completed. We've got our overflow hose connected down to our recovery tank, and we've gone in and filled it with antifreeze. Now remember, when you fill it with antifreeze, what we did is we lowered it down. We put it on jack stands on the front so we could tip it up a little bit, and then lowered it back down, tipped up the back, and then the front again, just to kind of make sure we got all the air bubbles out. And then after you run it for a few minutes, you'll have more air in it again. Same thing with your power steering fluid, so be aware of that. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. On the next one, we're going to hook up the sniper, and more importantly, we're going to start the car. Can't wait. So please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Okay, there you have it. Everything's all hooked up. We've got our overflow valve. Come on. Do what you're going to do. Okay.